I'm thrilled today to have with us Will Pomerantz. I, growing up, was the kind of kid who, when the teacher asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, I always wrote astronaut. And so those of you who don't know, Will is a part of Virgin Galactic. He's currently the Vice President of Special Projects at Virgin Galactic, which many of you know or should know was founded by Sir Richard Branson. In that role, Will helps Virgin Galactic's business beyond just what we normally think of, which is their space tourism, and he really pushes the boundaries for them, helping them to develop efforts for their LauncherOne orbital launch vehicle, for some of their small satellites and suborbital research campaigns on board the SpaceShipTwo. Will also has a lot of experience and involvement in various other endeavors outside of Virgin Galactic. He's trustee and the chair of the board of advisors for the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, which is the world's largest student space organization. He's the co-founder of the Brooke Owens Fellowship Program, which is designed to train women pursuing careers in aviation and space exploration. He's an advisor to WayPaver Labs, which is a nonprofit dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human exploration, and he's a member of the Professional Development Committee of Women in Aerospace. Will's a graduate of Harvard University, which we'll forgive him for because he informed me today that both of his parents are graduates of the University of Michigan, so go blue. He's also a graduate of the NASA Academy, the International Space and the International Space University. Prior to joining Virgin Galactic, Will worked at the nonprofit Xprize Foundation, where he served as the primary author and manager of the $30 million Google Lunar X Prize and the $2 million Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander X Challenge. Will's worked at Brown University, the Futron Corporation, the United Nations, and was co-founder and editor-in-chief of Space Alumni, which was an early social network for space professionals. He previously served on the Federal Aviation Administration's Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee and on a National Academies Committee studying issues impacting the national aerospace workforce. Without further ado, Will Pomerantz.
Welcome. Perfect. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. As you heard, both my parents are Wolverines. They're alums. This is my first time to come and pay hail to the victors, so I'm really happy to be here on campus to meet all of y'all. I have the great fortune of absolutely loving my job. I work in a rocket factory, which is the job I thought I would have when I was 5. And so I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours. I'm going to try and summarize it in about 20 minutes, so I'll be moving fast here. I want to tell you about what's going on in our space industry these days. Space has always been a cool industry. It's always been an inspiring industry, but it's actually been a really sort of stagnant industry for a long time. Space has sort of been an industry with kind of one player and one customer. You've got like NASA and Congress. And NASA does amazing things. My wife works for NASA. I used to work for NASA. I'm a huge NASA fan. But in any organization, in any industry, when you only have one player serving one customer, it's not ripe for innovation. It's not ripe for entrepreneurship. That's finally starting to change in the space industry, which is why I'm really excited to come and talk to university campuses, talk to things like entrepreneurship classes in particular. I'll tell you a little bit about where we are and where we're going. First, if you will indulge me, I'm going to share with you just a tiny bit of history. We got to understand that to know where we're going here. Just to show you this little bit of history here, space has been open for a long time, right? The first satellite went to space on the 4th of October 1957. First human went to space in April of 1961. So that's like 3 generations earlier than you all. Oh, did I just die here? Can you still hear me? I'll just talk louder. Maybe someone can bring out the handheld mic. I'll switch. Can you hear me in the back if I just speak loudly?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. So it has been open for a while, but it's still not very open. I mean, chances are, I can't see everyone because the lights are down, but chances are none of you has been to space yet. If anyone has, just correct me. It's a small enough group that I can tell that by looking at your faces, because only 555 human beings have ever been to outer space. This is the number, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. Because frankly, if I'm perfectly honest with you, I look at that number and it pisses me off. Because I grew up watching Star Trek and Star Wars and the Jetsons, and that all taught me that by the time the future arrived, like we would have all gone to space. I sure as hell would have gone to space, right? and all of you would have had a chance to go to space. Even though you're just students, you would have gone to space already. You would have gone to space to do research. You would have gone to space to start a company. You would have gone to space just for fun. That hasn't happened, right? On average, 10 people have flown to space. 10 new people have flown to space every year since Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. It's not just that the numbers are so small, it's also like the least diverse group ever. I grouped that by demographics on purpose. You can tell the number of people who have been to space, it's overwhelmingly male, about 90% male. It's overwhelmingly from one country. We happen to live in that country, so good for us. But they're all between the ages of like 30 and 40 when they first go to space. They're all in absolutely perfect physical condition. They all studied a very small number of subjects in school and come from a very small number of professional backgrounds. It means if you just pluck a random person off the streets here in Ann Arbor, chances are no one who looks like them has ever been to outer space. And I think that's disappointing. Because the NASA astronauts who have gone, or the Russian cosmonauts, or the Chinese taikonauts, they're awesome people. They are national heroes. They are really phenomenal in every respect. But they shouldn't be the only ones who get to go. All of us should get to go. Whether you want to do ballet in space, or take pictures, or do science experiments, or whatever else, you should have a chance to do it. And you never have. My boss, Richard Branson, came to that same conclusion way before I did. He was one of these people that grew up watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin hop along the surface of the moon back in 1969, and he said, surely by the time I'm grown up, I'll be doing that. That didn't happen. He's from the UK. The UK just sent their first ever official astronaut to space last year, so they don't really have a human spaceflight program. If they did, they would not pick Richard Branson to be part of it. He's not a college graduate. He's barely a high school graduate. He's dyslexic. He's famous for breaking rules. These really aren't the kinds of selection criteria they use typically when they're picking astronauts. But he's a pretty successful guy, right? He's an entrepreneur. He started dozens of companies. He started 9 companies that have over $1 billion valuation. I think he's earned a chance to go to space. He went out looking for someone to sell him a ticket in the 1990s, and he discovered, at least back then, there wasn't anyone. So he went out looking for a technology that could carry human beings to space both safely and affordably, right? One of those two things wasn't good enough. You got to do both. And that was actually a really long search. It took a long time before finally he found this vehicle. This is a vehicle system called Spaceship One. It was, and remains to this very day, the only ever privately built thing to carry human beings into space. And the exciting thing about this vehicle wasn't just that it looked cool or that it was on the Daily Show and had the Google Doodle and whatever else. It was the fact that this entire program went from, the classical drawing on a napkin through all the design, build and manufacturing, testing, and through multiple missions to space for a price tag of $27 million, which is a lot to me and a lot to you all, presumably, but in aerospace terms is nothing. It is less than the rounding error on most contracts. It is like the accounting error on most contracts in the space business. So the exciting thing for Richard is if you can build that whole system and fly it to space 3 times for $27 million, that probably means you can sell tickets on the 4th flight for not very much. And finally, you can have the first ever space line, something that is like an airline, but with good customer service, and also goes to space. So he'd had this idea for a long time. He'd had the name Virgin Galactic. He didn't have the technology. This vehicle was designed by this guy, Burt Rutan, and funded by this guy. That's Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, one of the top 10 richest people of the world. Paul had just done this to prove that it could be done. He's like won a Super Bowl and done the America's Cup thing, and he really loves aviation, so he wanted to go and claim this prize, but he wasn't planning on commercializing it. So we got one team with a business plan and no technology. One team with a technology and no business plan. It was a pretty obvious next step. And Virgin Galactic was really born on this day after the final successful flight of Spaceship One. Now, Richard is not an engineer. He's not an aviator. He's not going to go and say, oh, we need to make these wings 2% bigger. He's a business person. He's an entrepreneur. So he did what makes sense to entrepreneurs. He said, if I'm going to sell a product, I should probably talk to the customers about what it is they want to buy. Right? If you're going to go to space, you're going to spend some money, and you're going to accept some personal risk, why would you want to do that? So Virgin Galactic went and we talked to astronauts who had already been to space, and we talked to wealthy people who said they would like to buy a ticket to space, and we said, what do you want? What's actually important about going to space to you? And we found really the same answers from everybody we talked to, which is really nice when you're an entrepreneur. Everyone said they wanted the same 4 things. They kind of used different words and said them in a different order, but they all say, I want to ride on top of a rocket. This is not an elevator ride. This is not boring. I want this to feel exciting, and I want to feel like I'm accelerating. I want to feel that rumbling. They want to look out the window if you take people to space in a tin can, they'll feel like you cheated them. They want to look out and see the black skies of space, but mainly they want to look back and see planet Earth from above. They want to float in weightlessness. They don't just want to know they're in space because they see M&Ms floating through the cabin. They want to be the one floating through the cabin, flying like Superman or doing yoga poses or whatever else is you want to do. And then lastly, they want status. They want platform. They want the ability to come to great universities like the University of Michigan and come talk to students. So we realized that with our prototype vehicle, Spaceship One, we were doing this one. It was Mach 3.5. That's pretty fast. Most people like that. First ever commercial astronauts, yeah, that'll get you some platform and some status. But Spaceship One didn't really have any windows. It had some small portholes for the pilot to look out when he or she was landing the vehicle, but nothing for the passenger to look out of. And it was so small that you had to remain strapped into your seat, basically in the fetal position throughout the full flight. So we said, okay, you know what, if we're going to sell a like $250,000 experience, checking 2 out of 4 boxes, probably not great. So let's go and take this technology that's proven, let's scale it up, and let's build, not Spaceship One, but let's build Spaceship Two. And that's what my company's been doing for the last 10 years or so. I'm going to take you very quickly through the experience. I'm going to skip a lot of the details on the engineering, although I'm happy to answer those later during the question and answer, but this is an entrepreneur class, so I just want to tell you about the experience, what people are buying. Our vehicle is a fully reusable 8-seater space plane. It always has 2 human pilots in the front of the vehicle, and then as many as 6 passengers in the back of the vehicle. It could be fewer if you've chartered the flight and want to fly alone, or with your sweetheart or whatever, that's cool. If you're not having any people, if you just have experiments in the back of the vehicle, we can do that as well. The way it works, actually, we have a 2-vehicle system. We don't start our missions standing vertically on a launch pad in Cape Canaveral like other space missions you may have seen. We actually begin all of our missions with the spaceship sort of nested under the wing of a specially modified airplane. I call it a catamaran because it's a dual fuselage aircraft. That offers a lot of safety advantages as well as a lot of performance advantages. You know, even at an altitude like a jet flies, even though you're not very far the way to space by miles, you're actually above about 99% of the atmosphere already. So it just makes the job of getting to space a whole lot easier. So the way it's going to work when you fly to space, and I say when rather than if, because it's my hope that all of you who want to fly to space will be able to fly to space, whether it's with us or another company. That's very different than when I was your age. You're going to start out by coming and doing 3 days of training and preparations with us. That's not the Right Stuff movie. It's not boot camp. We designed a vehicle where if you are healthy enough to ride on a roller coaster, you are healthy enough to fly to space, and that is a total game changer. I found out when I was 8 years old that I could never be a NASA astronaut. I'm physically disqualified. I have this really horrible medical condition called needing to wear glasses. And that's enough. That knocks me out of contention for life. Doesn't matter how smart I might be, how good my grades are, how much money I make, nothing. No chance, 0 chance. That sucks. A lot of great people wear glasses or have other problems, right? You should all be able to fly to space. Our design reference customers for this vehicle, we had 2 of them. One of them is Richard Branson, who's in good shape, but he's 65. And the other is his mother. I won't tell you her age, but you can kind of imagine it. So you're going to come do these 3 days of training and preparation. On the 4th day, you're going to dress in your flight suit. You're going to get in the spaceship. You're going to take off under the airplane. You're going to fly up to an altitude of about 50,000 feet. Once you're up there and the pilots have done all the final checkouts on the vehicle, they will go ahead and they will release the spaceship from the mothership. These are all real pictures, by the way, from test flights. None of this is computer graphics. So you're going to be in the back of here along with 2 pilots and 5 of your friends. You're going to free fall away from the mothership for about 3 seconds. And then the pilots on board the spaceship are going to ignite the hybrid rocket motor, and you're going to have that first thing that you wanted, that right stuff moment. You're going to accelerate up past the speed of sound in about 10 seconds. And you're going to keep accelerating from there up to a maximum speed, let me go back to this, of about, sorry, some of those went when I wasn't expecting them to. Ooh, my clicker is acting up a little bit. Maybe I'm too far away. There we go. You're going to accelerate up to about 3.5 times the speed of sound. That's about 2,500 miles per hour, more or less. For most of you, if you haven't been to space already, again, that will be the fastest you've ever gone. I don't care if you flew on the Blackbird or the Concorde. Like, you're going faster than that. So you're getting that right stuff experience. The rocket engine is going to fire for about a minute. You can kind of tell if you look carefully at this picture. There's the twin contrails from the carrier aircraft. And then there's a blank space where the vehicle was in free fall. And then if you trace back the rocket plume, you can see what's happening as the vehicle lights its rocket engine. and it turns, and it starts to turn a corner and go straight up. That's our flight profile. We're not trying to fly from Detroit to London. We're trying to fly from the ground to the highest altitude I can possibly get you to. So the way we do that is a right turn, essentially, and we take you on a straight line up. You will be feeling that loud, rumbling, dynamic environment for about 60 seconds. That's how long we fire the rocket motor. And then at the end of a minute or so, plus or minus a couple seconds, depending on weather and a couple other things, the pilots are going to turn off that rocket motor, and you're going to instantaneously go from loud, rumbling, push back into your seat, high acceleration environment, into complete silence and to true weightlessness. This is no simulation. This is weightlessness. You're going to take off your seatbelt. You're going to float around that cabin. You're going to get that experience in weightlessness. That is one of the things that our astronauts want. You're going to have a chance to push your nose up against the window and look out. We've got twice as many windows as we have passengers, so you don't have to worry about an annoying neighbor hogging the good views. The windows are about twice as big as they are on a typical jet plane. So actually they're positioned such that if you push your nose against the window, you don't see window. It's right at the very edge of your peripheral vision. You just get a chance to look out and see the Earth from above, like only 555 people have done. It's not the whole planet. Only 24 people have ever seen that. You have to go almost all the way to the moon to see the whole planet. But you're going to get sort of a regional view of the southwestern United States coming from our launch site. You're going to see the Grand Canyon from space. You'll see the Gulf of California, the Rio Grande River Valley, those kinds of things. The experience at space isn't all that long. It's about 5 minutes. It's very similar to what Alan Shepard got when he became the first American in space. But relative to other space experience, 5 minutes is an eternity, right? I actually come from a science background. My academic training is in earth and planetary sciences. I grew up designing experiments to operate in microgravity for fractions of a second. So 5 minutes seems like an awfully long time if you've come from that kind of background. While you are looking out the window and pressing your nose against the glass, the pilots are going to be reconfiguring the vehicle into what we call the feather position. This is a really unique kind of geeky engineering thing that I won't go into for time, but I'm happy to answer questions about. But this is the way we manage safe re-entry. All of you have probably taken at least some physics classes. You know about the conservation of momentum. You know about conservation of energy. You know every bit of energy we put into the vehicle to accelerate it up to 3.5 times the speed of sound. We got to safely get out of the vehicle in order to come to a stop on a runway. If you look at the history of human spaceflight, it turns out that the coming down part is just as hard as the going up part. And this is sort of the patented award-winning way that we've decided to solve that by building a vehicle that isn't just a spaceship, it's also a transformer. And during the parts of flight when you want to have wings, you have wings. And during the parts of flight where you don't want to have wings, you fold them up like you see here in this picture. So that'll be happening. You probably won't even notice because it'll be basically silent. And hopefully you're really having a good time floating around, doing those somersaults, looking out the window. You'll be in space, like I said, for about 5 minutes. And then it's about a half-hour glide back down, until you come to a landing on the same runway you took off from an hour and a half or so after takeoff. But now you're an astronaut. And you can tell everyone that at every football game you go to for the rest of your life, or whatever else it is. So I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, 555 people have ever been to space, total, from Yuri Gagarin through the current crew that's on the International Space Station right now. Our pre-sales number about 700. So we're really excited about that. You know, 700 would be a really bad sales day for our sister companies like Virgin Atlantic and Virgin America, but when you're a space line, that's a lot. You know, that represents about $120 million in revenue. It also represents astronauts from 68 different nations, about 36 of whom will be the first ever astronaut from their country. Another 24 or so will be the first ever female astronaut from their country. We're really excited not just about serving those customers, but about what happens when those customers go back and they are speaking in the schools, and they are going to Parliament, and they are telling their country to invest in STEM education or whatever else is they want. All of our customers are going to have fun. Most of them are going just to have fun. They're tourists. We're excited about that. But that's not all of them. Some of them are professional astronauts, professional educators, are student researchers, are experiment builders. We have the ability to fly the vehicle as a research vessel. So I think this is the first computer graphic I'll show you. We can pull the seats out of the back of the vehicle. We can install a rack mounting system that will allow us to fly payloads built by NASA scientists, but also many of the ones that we're already signed to fly are from universities, and we're really excited about that. I can tell you, for those of you who want jobs in engineering, being able to say on your resume that you built and flew something to space looks really damn attractive to an employer. So I'm looking forward to an era when like all of you will have had a chance to do that maybe like once per year throughout your undergraduate education. It's gonna make you way more hireable, and it's gonna make you way better employees when you come and work at companies like mine. So we're really excited about that future. Okay, my last couple of minutes here, I'm gonna tell you about our entire other product line. And I'm gonna go super fast because the philosophy is basically the same. It's just the technology is different and the market is a little different. I'll start again just with a tiny, tiny bit of history. This is Sputnik, the first ever thing that humans built and sent into space. This is October 4th, 1957. That's a year before the integrated circuit was developed, right? I like this picture because there's a person in it. You can get a sense of scale. Sputnik was about the size of a beach ball. It weighed a little less than 150 pounds. It's a piece of cutting-edge electronics in 1957. I want you to think for just a second of any other type of electronics in 1957 versus today, and what changed. Everything else got very, very small. It got very, very lightweight. It got very, very cheap. And it went from something that was owned by like the US military and MIT to something that's owned, like we all own hundreds of them. Right? I don't even want to know how many computers are in this room right now between your Fitbits and your smartwatches and your iPhones and your laptops and your whatever else is. There's thousands of them just in this room. Satellites didn't do that for a variety of like mainly political reasons. Instead of getting smaller and cheaper, satellites for the most part got bigger and more expensive, like, yeah, so big that I can't fit them on a slide. They're much more capable. All Sputnik did was go beep, beep, beep. Satellites like this, you know, explore the origins of our universe and find other planets and do really amazing things. So the capability's gone way up, but so has the price, and so has the mass, which is why probably none of you own your own satellite. And neither do any of your families, neither does the city of Ann Arbor, nor the state of Michigan. You actually happen to go to one of the very few schools in the world that does own its own satellites, but there aren't very many schools like that, and even this one doesn't own that many of them, right? It's not like computers where we all own 1 million of them, and so that means that one of you can go and invent Snapchat, and one of you can go and invent Pokemon Go, and one of you can go and invent whatever else. We've never seen that in space because it costs billions of dollars to even try. And entrepreneurs can't start in businesses where the startup capital costs are $1 billion. That has just started to change. People have realized that you can go down to Radio Shack or Best Buy or whatever your local electronics store is, and you can buy a processor that is more advanced than anything NASA put in space until 5 or 10 years ago. You can buy a better camera than anything NASA put into space just 5 or 10 years ago, and it only costs you 10 or 20 bucks. So why not make cheap satellites? Why not make small ones? It started in universities, now it's out in companies. This is a project that's owned by Google. They acquired it a few years after it was an assignment on a graduate school class at a Stanford Business School. They bought it for $500 million. Google now has several of its own satellites in space. Now Google's really rich, maybe they could do that, but you're starting to see other companies do that as well, with satellites that are the size of the refrigerators that you all maybe have in your dorm room, or maybe that are the size of a coffee mug. This is something called a CubeSat. It's literally 10 centimeters to an edge. These started out just being like Sputnik, just going beep, beep, beep. Now these things are taking pictures that help us enforce international treaties, or help Walmart improve their supply chain, or help monitor methane leaks from the Porter Ranch gas leak in Southern California, or whatever else the case may be. Now, this has not escaped the attention of the world, whether it's Science and Nature, or The Economist, or the Wall Street Journal. People have sat up and paid attention to these small satellites. In fact, last year was by far the biggest year ever for venture capital investment in all of space, and it's entirely driven by these small satellites. But a weird thing happened. Even as, like we've just been talking about, satellites were getting smaller and smaller and cheaper, the rockets were getting bigger and bigger and more expensive. And they're getting better. They're way more capable than they used to be. They're actually way cheaper per pound or per kilogram than they used to be. But if the cheapest rocket on the market is $100 million, it doesn't matter how cheap it is per pound. You cannot design a Kickstarter campaign big enough to buy you a $100 million rocket. It's just not going to happen. So we decided at Virgin Galactic that was an opportunity for us. And just like we did with our human spaceflight project, let's make something that isn't going to Mars. It's not putting people on the surface of the moon. Let's just go the minimum thing that we can go and still call it space. We're doing the same thing now with satellites. We're building a small satellite launch vehicle. There's a picture of it. It's called LauncherOne. We're capable of carrying something that is about the size of your refrigerator, your dorm room refrigerator, to space for sort of single-digit millions of dollars. Still expensive in real people terms, crazy cheap by space terms. And this is what's allowing us to sell to startup companies, to entrepreneurial firms, but also to NASA, and also to the US Department of Defense, and also to governments in the developing world. We are incredibly excited about that. I showed you a couple computer graphics, so I'll end here just with some pictures as well. It's also launched from an airplane. In this case, it's a 747, so we bought the airplane last year. It turns out that 747s are already designed to carry payloads under the left-hand wing. Who knew? I certainly didn't. So that makes it really handy for our job of carrying a big payload under the left-hand wing. We've got a facility down in Southern California where we employ lots of engineers, and hopefully we'll employ some of you sometime soon, building rocket engines and going out and testing them on the rocket stand. And in fact, we're now in the advanced state of testing for every single component of the rocket. So we're not yet flying to space. We're still a year, 2 years off from routinely doing that. But we're getting there. And we're selling lots of rides. Oh, there we go. We got a great team. This is the team just for our small satellite launch vehicle program, about 200 engineers on that. We've got something like 400 or 450 on the human spaceflight program. The team is growing. We're hiring people fresh out of school. We're hiring interns, and I hope you will have some questions about that. I think we're going to do some questions up here on stage. There will be some afterwards. I'm not going to have time to talk to each of you one-on-one, unfortunately, so I just threw my email address up there. There's some weird font issues, so sorry it doesn't fit on one line. But I hope that anyone who doesn't have a chance to ask me questions now will send me an email later. So thanks very much for having me, and I think a few are going to join us. We're going to answer some questions.
Yes, thanks, Will. That's absolutely some amazing stuff, and increased my desire again to relive my second grade dream of going up to space. So waiting for that to be a reality. One of the things the students in this class are doing is reading a book by Reid Hoffman called The Startup of You, and in it they talk about, Reid talks about technology globalization and its implications on the world. And interestingly, I think Virgin Galactic is going beyond just globalization with their technology development, but I'd be interested on your thoughts on how space exploration and technology globalization is having an effect on what the world looks like in the future.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Space used to not be a very global thing. You know, for a long time it was two superpowers who did space. It was Soviet Union and the United States. More recently, we've seen some really strong emerging powers in the space industry. China has a fantastic space program now. India has a fantastic space program. Europe has sort of banded together and has a single space program for the most part. Japan. But it's still been governments. And it's still been, for the most part, wealthy governments, quite wealthy governments, in fact. Because of stuff like what I just showed you with small satellites, that is now starting to change. And you can have both not very wealthy governments and individual companies and institutions, universities within those countries can start to develop. It's sort of like buy a space program in a box, and you open it up and voila, we've got the whole thing that took the United States billions of dollars in a decade. You can almost go and buy off the shelf right now.
In fact, we have students in our programs here at the university who, as part of courses and part of their degrees, actually have launched some of those CubeSats that you showed.
And that is like changing the world. That is a totally revolutionary thing. Because it turns out if you are a small government in the developing world, building a satellite isn't just a prestige thing. Part of it is definitely a prestige thing. People just want to say, like, hey, we're here, we know how to do technology, also, we're smart. That is part of it. But satellites can have a huge implication on both your economy and sort of your basic infrastructure. Satellites can help you figure out where you need to build roads. Satellites can help you figure out where illegal logging or fishing is happening. Satellites can help you figure out, who's building without a permit, all these other kinds of things. So what we're seeing often now is you'll have governments like South Africa or Nigeria or the United Arab Emirates where they will literally go and they'll buy some of these small satellites and they will tailor them to meet their specific needs, and they don't have to spend $1 billion in a decade in startup capital. They spend $10 million in startup capital and a year, and all of a sudden they're getting the data that they specifically need, even at the same time as they build prestige and grow some jobs in the local economy.
That's great.
So there's a lot of smart engineers out here looking to work for maybe Google, SpaceX, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, or even Virgin Galactic, looking to send things into space. What makes Virgin Galactic different from that crowd?
Well, first of all, I encourage you, come work for all of us. Any part of the industry it's a really fun industry, and we're at a nice point in the industry where the success of those companies doesn't come at the success of the expense of our success. So I can root for them without. I don't have to sneakily root for them to fail. I'm out there cheering for all those guys and gals to win, and they all do have a slightly different working style. Just to use, you mentioned some of the individual people behind those organizations, someone like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or a Richard Branson. They personally are very different, and they have enormously put their personality as a stamp that sits on those companies. As I mentioned, Richard is not an engineer, and he doesn't really want to be an engineer. He's a business person, so he spends a lot of time. A lot of his oversight about us is very product centric, very experience centric. Is making sure that the pricing model is right and the investment strategy has been appropriate, and the way that we are servicing our customers, even as they wait for their flight, is right. He's not coming in and saying, make this fin a little bit bigger. Well, Elon is the chief technical officer of his company in addition to being the founder and CEO, so he sits in every design review and is telling you that, no, you need to increase that by 2%, or you got that exactly right, or whatever else it is. So those kinds of styles are very different. Some people thrive in one of those environments and are quickly driven insane by the other. Some people are, chameleons and can fit in wherever else. So I encourage you, a great thing about being young is you can experiment, and you can do 3 different internships in the summer after your 3 summers you have before you finish your undergrad, and sort of sample and discover which of those you like best. But also, we're all trying fundamentally different missions. Elon is very upfront. The reason he created SpaceX is he wants to travel to Mars personally. He wants to see humans and himself as the human on the planet Mars. So everything that company does, if it doesn't apply to humans on Mars, it is a distraction. And even if it's making money, we're not going to do it. And he's done that. That's why they retired some of the systems that they retired. Richard doesn't particularly care about humans on Mars. I mean, he thinks it's cool, and maybe he would buy a ticket if Elon's selling it. But that's not what his goal is. His goal is really about using space to help the Earth. So it is about monitoring illegal logging, and it is about growing local economies, and it is about taking this sort of inspirational effect that comes from human spaceflight and bringing that close to home. Jeff Bezos has yet another thing. He's all about millions of people living and working in space and sort of zoning space for manufacturing and things like that. So you can kind of pick both the working style that suits you best, but also all the research indicates, and is backed up by my experiences on college campuses, your generation much more so than mine or the ones before it, seem to really care about having a job that actually makes a difference in the world, and isn't just about you getting a salary and then going home and saying, God, I wish I didn't have to go back to work. I think all these companies are doing very meaningful things, but they're doing different things, and you can really tailor the one that's best suited to you.
That's great. Why don't we see if there's a question from the audience? Does anyone like to ask Will a question here?
When are the Bransons planning on going to space? Do they have a date-ish, or have they already been?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Richard will be our first customer. He won't be our first test pilot, although he would if we let him, and he'll probably try and stow away or something like that, because that's the type of guy he is. But he will be the first customer. That's for a couple reasons. One is he's genuinely wanted to go his entire life, and he's eager. The other thing is he's an expert marketer. And whenever I talk to someone and they're a little concerned about, space is dangerous, and I saw the Challenger, I saw the Columbia, and we've had accidents in our history, they say, am I going to come home safely? And I can answer, well, we're putting our billionaire founder on the vehicle first, and it's going to be broadcast on live television. They generally say, okay, either you're going to be safe or you're going to be out of business before my turn comes. So that's definitely a big part of it. The original plan was that he was going to go with his kids on the flight. They both now have young children of their own, so we'll see what happens with that. But that is the plan. And we're not putting an exact date on when that happens, but it's not a decade away. It's like a year away or 2 years away or something kind of that order of magnitude.
Hey, do you guys mostly employ aerospace engineers, or how many different types of engineers do you employ? And what kind of internships do you have for all the different kinds?
Great question. So we do mostly employ engineers, but all different types. Between the 2 programs, and technically we have 2 different sister companies, we're about 750 total staff, and I would say about 650 of those are engineers. We have supply chain and lawyers and human resources and that kind of stuff, but it really is a very engineering-driven company. Many of them will have aviation or aerospace engineering degrees. But actually, most of them do not. We hire a lot of just mechies, a lot of double E's, some computer scientists. We'd never used to have those, and that's sort of an increasingly growing area. And then we do have other weirdos like myself who sort of came in from the physical sciences but have some engineering expertise or can at least fake it long enough to get by. But yeah, aerospace engineering, mechies, and double E's are probably a pretty even spread between those, I would guess.
So I've been hearing recently that in the next couple of years there's going to be more missions looking to start mining asteroids for possibly refueling different ships in space. Do you guys think you could use this type of technology to maybe expand into that field, or will you stick to space tourism?
Yeah, great question. So when we first announced LauncherOne, our small satellite launch vehicle, we had a couple customers stand up with us on stage and say, we're really excited about this, we need this in order to succeed. And one of those was Planetary Resources, which is sort of the most famous of the companies that is looking to go and do asteroid mining or asteroid prospecting. Their innovation is coming up with very small satellites, and they have a lot more work to do, but they're doing a great job along that path. One could say that they would be better served by buying a giant launch vehicle, because either they could send a bunch of these things, or they could get a really cheap ride, or they could send it really far and really fast. But another sort of competitive advantage that we have for our satellite launch system over really any other system in the world is because we are launched from an airplane, and because we use some really modern avionics systems, we can be extraordinarily responsive. It turns out with asteroids, some of them you know decades in advance when they're coming and where they're going, but the ones that are most interesting for a company like Planetary Resources, you may not know exists a month before you launch. So you really want this ability to say, okay, the launch is tomorrow, oh, here's the asteroid we picked, please send us there. You just can't do that on a ground-based rocket, because the efficiency of your orbital delivery system for a ground-based rocket, depending what orbit you want to go to, it really matters where on the Earth you are. You sort of want your latitude on the planet to match the inclination of the orbit you're going to, and Cape Canaveral only has one latitude, right? Vandenberg only has one latitude. When you have an airplane, we can pick whatever latitude we want. So between that quick call-up capability and that kind of inclination flexibility, they've told us that we're sort of in many ways the perfectly suited thing for them. So we hope the credit goes to them, but we hope to be an enabler of their success.
All right, well, one last question here.
Hi, Will. So my question is if you can give us a brief history about like your history and your experience, and then how you got from like college to where you are now as your position.
Yeah, happy to. So as I briefly mentioned, I actually come from a sciences background. My field of study was Earth and planetary sciences, and my job right out of undergrad was I was working as a Martian geologist, studying pictures of Mars every day, which was really cool because I got to like look at pretty pictures and think deep thoughts, and that was neat. But I was a scientist. Scientists love data. If you study other planets, you don't get a whole lot of data. Depending what planet you pick, you might get a new data set once a century, and that kind of wasn't my style. So I decided, instead of being one of the people analyzing the data, maybe I should just make there be more data by enabling there to be more missions. And if there's just more missions to space in period, then there'll be more missions to Mars and more missions to Jupiter and more missions to planet Earth and other places as well. So I really fell in love with this idea of cheap, frequent access to space. Tried to find a career path to do that. I ended up going back to school at this sort of weird, quirky graduate school called the International Space University, which sounds like Starfleet Academy, I know, but it is a real place. It is more engineering than anything else, but it's engineering, science, business and policy, law, medicine, a little bit of everything. The analogy I always use is it's like going to a restaurant that is a buffet. It's not the best food in the world, but if you've never tried a type of cuisine, it's a great way to try 20 different things and say, oh, I really like this and I don't like this. My thought was I would do that, discover I really like this, and then go get another degree in that thing. For better or worse, I discovered I like the buffet. It's just sort of my thing. I am definitely a jack of all trades and master of none. So I tried to find a job where someone would pay me to do that, and that was a little difficult. People like to employ experts rather than generalists in many fields. I was kind of able to scratch that itch by doing consulting, and you can pick your projects and do an engineering project and a management project. But I ended up, because I am an entrepreneur by nature, and I was running a startup, and I had taken over an alumni association and done all these other things, I made connections with a bunch of people in the aerospace industry, which is shockingly small. There's like 12 of us. We've all worked for each other at some point. It's crazy. I ended up getting a job at this place called the Xprize Foundation, which is a nonprofit that pays out these big multi-million-dollar cash prizes to engineering teams, however you want to define teams, that solve these major technology challenges. I did that for 6 years. I got to run a prize for NASA. I got to run a prize for Google. Got to meet basically everyone in the industry. But I also had this insight, because I was running these technology competitions. I wasn't on any of the teams, but it was kind of like I was a cheerleader for each of the teams, and I had access to the locker room, and I could do whatever else. So I got to see how these different entrepreneurs worked, both from an engineering level and from a management level, and that was an incredibly valuable experience. And after I'd been doing that for about 6 years, Virgin Galactic had grown to the point where we were born as a space tourism company, but always knew that, like any company, you should have more than one product. You should diversify a little bit. There were lots of ideas that predated me joining the company for what those other things might be, but no one had looked at them with any particular rigor and said, okay, these ideas are good ideas, these ideas are bad ideas, we should do this first and do this second, we should make this, we should buy that. And so they needed a generalist. And I happened to know them, and they knew I worked well with them, so I got brought on board to do that, and I've been having fun ever since.
It's fantastic. Well, let's thank our speaker, Will Pomerantz.
So Civil Maps is essentially a 3D mapping company where we leverage cars that are being driven by humans that have the ability to generate depth data. By depth data, I mean data coming from cameras, LiDARs,